Welcome to Tales from the Art Side. In today's video I will show you how I built a custom frame for my Bioshock Little Sister oil painting. The wood I used to build this frame is nothing special, just nominal pine 1x4s. Most of this wood I am using consists of the cut ends left over from a previous construction project. The first thing that I did was set up my wood router using a 3/4 inch straight cut bit and put a rabbet cut into each of my flat boards. This will act as a recess for the painting to sit in once the frame is completed. I imagine this could also be accomplished with a regular standard table saw and standard blade and running the wood through several times, each time with a slight offset in each pass. Once the rabbet cuts were completed, I switched my bit to a 5/8 inch V-groove cutter. I'm using this bit to cut in 3 decorative flutes across the face of each of my flat boards. My goal with this frame is to create an industrial Art Deco look. Something that one might see in game in the City of Rapture. Once again, I think this could be somewhat mimicked with a table saw and a block of sandpaper to widen the cuts made by the saw blade. A quick sanding with the sanding sponge to clean up the grooves, and then it was on to priming. I primed the boards with a Kills oil-based primer. I like this primer for its adhesion to the wood, as well as its sandability. Just make sure to use it in a well-ventilated area. And once the primer was fully dry, another light sanding, and a quick wipe down with the rag to remove the sanding dust before painting. I covered each of the boards with a flat black acrylic paint, and then they are ready for the next step, the gold, or well in this case, copper gilding. If you've never done this before, the process is quite simple. You lay down a layer of the glue. In this case I'm using Speedball's metal leaf adhesive. For this I usually use an old brush that I can just throw out after I'm done. This stuff can be a real bugger to get out of a brush. Once the adhesive had dried and became tacky, it was time for the leafing. For the metal leafing I'm using Delta's Renaissance Copper Foil. For this particular brand, the metal leaf is attached to a thin plastic back plate that I can lay it across the frame and then simply rub it into place. Different brands are set up differently. Some just come in thin metal sheets that can be hard to work with because they're very fragile. Once it was all rubbed in, I was able to peel back the plastic sheeting, and there it is, reveal the copper. Now, I just had to do this over and over to cover all my boards. At this point, I glued and brad nailed my flat or horizontal boards to my vertical edge boards. Sorry if I hadn't mentioned the edge boards before, but anyway. Once the boards were all securely put together, I then used the chop saw to cut in the 45-degree miter angles. With all the angles cut in, I was able to assemble all the pieces and once again glue and nail them together. I started learning to build my own frames years ago in college, I think. One reason I started to do this was, I couldn't find frames that I liked, that were really extensions of the paintings. And frankly, it was a lot cheaper. I think I bought a cheap miter box and a saw, and from there just kept building up my tools and techniques. For a decorative three-dimensional accent in the corners and the center of the frame, I cut a bunch of shapes out of thick leather scraps. But if you're doing something like this for your own frame, it doesn't have to be leather. Thin wood, hardboard, or whatever is the right thickness and is easy enough to cut might do. Once I had all my pieces cut out, I set them in place using original tacky glue. With all the accents in, I was then able to paint them with flat black acrylic paint, and I waited for the glue to fully dry. Once the glue was dried, I tapped in some brass tacks around the corners to help hold on the leather as well as making a nice finished riveted look. Using a nickel silver colored craft paint mixed with a touch of blue Badger airbrush paint, I lightly dry brushed the entire frame. My goal was to give it a distressed old iron look, bringing out all the dents, dings, and cracks in the wood surface. I decided that the silver was just a bit too light, as well as it needed more of a blue tone to work well with the intense blues in the painting itself. To solve this issue, I took some of the same phthalo blue and ivory black oil paint that I used on the painting and laid in a thin wash of the mix with a rag dipped in mineral spirits. For a few extra details, I painted in some indications of rust and other types of oxidation in key places throughout the frame. For this, I just used a brush and acrylic paints. Now I just needed to make a nameplate for the painting. I cut out a piece of leather and wet the surface to prepare for tooling. Using a punch, I gently cut 2 circles into my leather, being careful not to cut all the way through. Then I used the concave end of my button setter to create a dome in the leather circle I'd just punched in. The idea here is that I want to create what will look like an X and Y button from an Xbox controller. Using a set of lettering stamps, I tooled in the letters XY along with the word Harvest across the top. This will be the title of the painting, Harvest XY, representing those points in the game when a player must choose whether to rescue a little sister or harvest one for an increased amount of Atom. With all the tooling done, I painted up the title plate with craft paints. The tricky thing with painting this was trying to keep the lettering looking as clean as possible. And now with the lettering all painted, it was time to glue the nameplate in place and tap in a couple decorative brass tacks. And with that, I think it's time for the final showcase. Oh, and if you'd like to see the process for the painting of the little sister, be sure to click on the link at the end of this video. Thank you. And as always, I want to thank my wonderful Patreon patrons, Snowy May, Casey and Travis Schilling, Akunin, Brandy Harry, and Disma Fiend. Thank you.